There we are.
Welcome to this week's It's Your Time You're Wasting.
Hey, hang on.
Martin,
Look. I can do that.
that's very nice. Did you make that yourself?
My daughter made that.
Your daughter made it. I remember. Yes, yes.
There
You were
you
telling.
go.
Very nice. Do thank her.
Will do.
Okay, lovely. Right. Well, not only has she been wasting her time on making that beautiful intro screen, we're now going to waste your time. And this week, Martin, what are we talking about?
We're talking about scripted lessons versus teacher autonomy.
Right. Yes. Before we get into it, though, what should people do?
People should, this is their script, okay? They should
Yeah.
follow this script, definitely.
Right.
Please like and subscribe on YouTube and also give us stars and things on all our numerous podcast providers or
Platform.
whatever they're called.
Yeah.
And
Okay.
follow, can you follow? Do you follow on podcast?
I don't know what you do. I don't know what you do, but whatever it is, do it, and we'll be most grateful. So, yeah. So, a couple of articles that caught our eye this week. The first of which is an article that was published on TES. How We Dumb Down Teaching and What We Must Do to Fix It by Sam Gibbs. And unrelated, but came out the same week, was a post on Greg Ashman's Filling the Pail site, which is just called On Scripted Lessons, and they take two sides of a similar issue. Would it be helpful, Martin, if I just sort of summarised what's in each of the?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. Okay.
I'll listen.
All right. Okay. So Um, so if we take the first one, the one on Tez, so it opens with Sir Kevin Collins. You remember him?
Sir Kevin.
Sir Kevin now. Sir Kev. Oh,
Kevan. Kevan.
Kevan.
Kevan.
Yeah, Sir Kevan, who he was the first director of the Education Endowment Foundation. Sorry, I did a little burp there. I know, awful, very unprofessional. And he was the COVID czar for a bit before becoming really impatient with Boris Johnson and leaving.
Imagine
And
that.
who can think why? And now he's a non-exec board member at the DFE, and he was giving a speech where he was highlighting what he described as narrow compliant culture. And he was talking about the phenomenon of schools mandating PowerPoint slides, slide decks that teachers must use. And obviously, in the most extreme cases, being told to be on the same slide deck on the same lesson as their colleagues. And he characterized this by saying that teachers are enslaved in ways that they never used to be. He says, yeah, the quote, he's never seen teachers more enslaved. And so obviously there's this idea of real loss of agency. So the article sort of then goes on to look at the idea that, we've got this potentially in some schools, in some multi-academy trusts, a teach by numbers approach. But teaching's inherently complex. Teachers have to make lots of decisions responding to the children in front of them, and that there's a tension there between a standardized curriculum resource or a script or a slide deck and the actual needs of a group of students in front of you. And so her call to action is that teaching should be more of an intellectual profession, and the policymakers, education leaders need to work on creating environments that value agency and critical thinking. And then it wasn't a response to this at all, but it was another article, as we said, Greg Ashman, and he was responding to someone else in Australian education who was talking about the problem with scripted lessons. And his point was that you get consistency and quality. particularly for less experienced teachers or anybody who's having to teach outside their subject area. And in the best cases, scripts can serve as valuable tools that he acknowledges that there's a concern around teacher autonomy and contends that the more experienced you are, the more likely you are to adapt and ad lib and throw in things on top of the scripted content that you might have. He looks at these things as being more flexible guides than rigid structures. But he also talks about the fact, and I think this is an interesting point and one we should sort of pick up a little bit, is that they can be professional development resources, and they can really help teachers to hone and understand the strategies and the subjects that they're teaching, and help them improve their practice. And he talks about the fact that in the maths department that he works in, they go for a constant cycle of reiteration where they're looking at the best outcomes. They're going to the teachers and saying, "What did you do differently?" and then factoring that into the scripts, the lesson resources to be used in following years.
Okay.
What's your take on those positions,
Yeah,
Martin?
I mean, it's it's interesting that you can have a reasonable conversation about this, and I think the reasonable bit is somewhere in the middle between the two, because I think there are arguments for having a degree of cohesion around a curriculum, a cohesion around the wording you use, the quality of teaching. Um, and we're talking about teaching as a delivery model here, very, very much teacher saying things towards the children, shall we say. So there's a delivery mode about it. And we can talk about other forms of teaching at some point, perhaps. The great thing that you have if you don't have such things is freedom and agency and all those things that actually make the job, some might say, worthwhile. And that is you're going in and you're saying, right, this is what I'm teaching. I've found out about it. I really understand the mechanics of this thing I'm teaching, and I want to get it across to these children. And this is the way I'm going to get it across. And you have a certain amount of creative license yourself to do that. Then you have a certain amount of pride in what you're doing. And also you can judge how well it's going straight away because you're sensing more because you're listening more to them and the way they're responding to you, perhaps. I don't know.
Yeah, well, that's that, and those are obviously in the best cases what happens. And I think that I don't know if this was similar for you, Martin. When I started teaching, I was very much thrown in at the deep end. I was told to have a look in the stock cupboard and see what I fancied teaching. I was told what the GCSE texts I could choose from were, and told to just basically go off and make it up, which I duly did, and with a great deal of trial and error, and that was at times very stressful, and I felt very overworked and underprepared a lot of the time. And sometimes it worked, and sometimes it didn't work. And over the years, I maybe arrived at a way of doing these things which worked for me. But the children I was teaching in those first few years of teaching, I'm not sure they got the best deal they could have gotten.
Yeah, perhaps this is something to do with the subject that people teach as well. I think there might be a difference between the subject I was teaching, creative subject, drama, going in there, getting kids to act. I went in there and completely ignored everything that was in the stock cupboard, and I
Right.
was determined to do it my own way because I created a way of teaching that was different
Mm.
than the general way the subject was taught at that time. So I went in there with a very theatrical way of working, a very physical theatre way of working, which is completely different to the sort of Dorothy Heathcote school. Look, I'm getting way in. I'm going way in there. Let's withdraw a bit, but basically, I wanted to teach differently than the school was teaching drama at the time, and most drama departments were teaching at the time. And
And you were
that,
asked to do that.
and I
No
was,
one.
yeah, I was allowed to do that, and
Yeah.
because of the strength of the results I got and various other things, I would then became head of department over a couple of years, and really led the revolution. Brothers and sisters, comrades, etc., etc. So I can really see the argument that if you're not happy with the way things are, that if it's scripted and you're being told this is what you have to do, then I would have a bit of difficulty with that.
Mm.
The
So,
fact you were allowed to teach whatever whichever text you wanted to teach, I think is great, because some of those texts you know about and some of the texts you don't know about. So from
well,
let's go from that angle now.
I think some
There's
of
the
the
strength to
choices
it.
some of the choices that I was offered were things like, were like different young adult novels. Like, did I want to teach Anne Fine's The Tulip Touch or Stig of the Dump?
Oh,
It didn't feel inspiring.
I love Stig of the Dumb when I was a
Yeah,
kid.
I didn't
But
want to
anyway, but
teach.
not teaching. Yeah, it's a kid's book, isn't it? Really.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
So what
exactly.
did you teach? You get hold of your Greek text,
Oh,
you get hold of your Shakespeare's, your
well, no,
classic
I didn't.
novels.
It took me a while to sort of have the confidence to be able to do things like that. No, and it really wasn't until I'd been teaching a few years that I remember somebody saying to me something along the lines of what you should, whatever it is that you're doing, it should be of good enough quality that you'd be happy for your own children to have it. And I thought, God, I'm not.
Hmm.
Wow, okay, I really need to rethink this, because I really wouldn't be happy if this is what they were getting.
Yeah.
So
The strength of it as well is if you've got a teacher that's teaching all the way through, the same teacher, putting it all together over a period of time, and then they can refer back, refer forward, they can say the way things are going, and really understand the class developing over that time. Now, of course, that's not what happens in most
yeah,
schools, certainly. Well, yeah, in primary and secondary, you have a teacher and then you will move on to another teacher in another year, and et cetera, et cetera. So the idea of having some sort of joined upness with the curriculum becomes a bit anathema to these teachers who are teaching on their own, teaching their own way, doing
yeah,
their own thing, being creative. But
artisan teachers.
yeah, so in order to have cohesion in the curriculum and something that the children can follow, that they can develop, that they can move, step upon step upon step, that these things are building towards something, then obviously it's very difficult if every time you get a new teacher, everything's completely different. The texts are
Yeah,
different.
yeah.
There's no way that you perhaps you introduce Shakespeare in year 7 and then you build on it in year 8 and then build on it in year 9. If you haven't got teachers working together in some way, then that might not happen. It just comes down to the teacher to do it their own way.
So, Martin, are scripted lessons reducing autonomy? Like, are teachers more enslaved than ever before, or can we view this as a much needed antidote to stress and burnout and inconsistency?
I think it's not impossible that both might be true.
Okay.
And certainly on the attitude of the teacher. I mean, it's interesting. There used to be, I don't know if this is still true, but there used to be this saying that the busiest time on the TES Resources website was Sunday night, and
Yeah.
the second busiest time was Monday morning, which is teachers desperately looking for something to
Yeah.
teach that
Yeah.
day. So the
I've been there. Yeah.
laziness, and I'm putting that in inverted commas, of wanting someone to prepare a lesson for you,
Yeah.
and then finding it and then delivering it is something that you can see why teachers do it, because sometimes you need to fill in the time. You have a lot to do. But the problem is, if you have the whole attitude that you need to fill in time, then perhaps that time could be used more constructively. It's been designed beforehand as part
Yeah.
of a curriculum that unfolds year upon year, week upon week, etc., etc.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I've been working with some schools just recently that have introduced curriculum booklets, and the teachers in those schools are interesting. They all talk about the fact that they thought it was pretty terrible idea and they were dreading it, but that they love using them, and they feel that not only does it save them a ton of time, but actually they feel liberated by them, which is quite interesting. Take that rather than feeling that there's a sense of enslavement and a sense of being confined to something. It's they very much the way Greg was relating in his post, seeing it as a springboard and a guide and something to stabilize their ideas with, which
Okay,
I
well,
found really interesting.
let's get back to the pre-booklet times. I mean, when textbooks,
Textbooks.
and I think Greg talks about textbooks as well, and then talks about the quality of the textbook, which is why a lot of people perhaps
Yeah.
reject the idea of textbook. But the textbook, if it's a good textbook, let's pretend there's a great textbook out there for whichever subject you're teaching,
Mm.
then, and it's, volume 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or whatever it happens to be, it's
Yeah.
basically a selection of curriculum booklets all put together by somebody else. If you're following that, then there's a certain amount of sense in it that you then fit around the book, the textbook. The problem is a lot of us find out that when we get a textbook and we're looking through it, it's out of date. It's not the language we would use nowadays, or it's not what we would teach. It's not the way we'd like to teach. And this is where it becomes problematic. I mean, if we're talking about work we've done, I've done a lot of work with my book, Curriculum Revolutions, if you like, on this,
Hmm.
which is working with teachers on a way of developing their curriculum together. So
Yeah.
it's sort of scripted in a sense and booklets in a sense, if you like, but you're working together to create your curriculum. And there's a certain amount of autonomy, but it's collective autonomy. You
Collective autonomy is a nice way of putting it. Yeah.
So you create these things, but then you have to stick by the decisions you make. And it's not scripted, but there is a certain amount of shared understanding, shared language, shared ideas, and obviously a shared view of how the curriculum goes from A to B to C to D, all the way through. And that you understand. I like to talk about the cognitive architecture, or whatever you like, the architecture of the course that you are teaching. You understand how it fits together.
Hmm. Yeah. So that sounds great. That sounds really attractive. Obviously, it's abstracted. We can't see the detail of that, but it sounds like a really good way of working. And I think maybe rather than the idea of should should we use scripts, shouldn't we use scripts, I think part of the problem is the perception that there are some perhaps multi academy trusts that are very, very prescriptive in the way that they mandate lessons should unfold, the way that they expect resources to be used. Have
Yeah.
you, is that
I
something you've encountered?
and I instinctively follow the Kevin Collins way of thinking about it. I can just imagine me going into a school now. Here's your scripts. Here's your slides. Here's your. They must be used in this way. Blah blah blah. Bang! Off you go. There's your 5 years worth of year groups or whatever it happens to be, 6, 7 years or whatever. Off you go, and then someone comes around to check you're doing it. I suppose at some point.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Um,
I expect
probably
that would have to
regularly.
be, yeah.
Probably regularly.
Yeah, well, I don't know, but let's say they do, or there's ways of finding it if you have been using them centrally or something like that. Um, I would start to feel a bit bored.
Right. Okay. Okay. So I mean that's an interesting take right there, because one of the things that I sometimes think plays out in some settings is that decisions are made more for adults' convenience or preference than for children's benefit.
What, my boredom? You see, not
Well,
necessarily.
it's
I'm
your
better off
boredom that
bored.
matters. I don't know. I mean, obviously, we all want a lively, engaged Martin, but
But let's say I'm just following this script. I mean, again, if I'm just following the slides, how my
let's.
my instant reaction is, how good
Yeah.
are those damn slides? Who's
Okay.
put this
Okay.
together? And this is the
Right.
problem, isn't it?
That
Because
is
it's
the
put
problem.
together by some, I'm going to call them an idiot. I don't know who they are, by the way, but let's call
Right.
them an idiot just for the sake of argument. They're an
Right.
idiot. They've been told to make these slides 20 years ago, 5 years ago, 3 weeks ago, whenever it happened to be. They've
Yeah.
done it. Here you go. Those are the centrally mandated slides.
Yeah.
They're not as good as I am. They're
Right.
not as
Well,
good as I could do it.
that depends, isn't it? So let's. I think you were telling us you were having to teach outside of your subject. What was it you were having to teach again? Was it
I
DT
was
or
having
something?
to teach music. Yeah.
Music. Okay, music. Would it have been helpful for you teaching music?
Do you know what? The head of department wrote lesson plans for me,
Yeah. Yeah.
and it was loosely follow these ways of doing it. So there were loose things, and all the materials that I had to use were there. I had to get the keyboards out and put the desks in certain places and all this sort of stuff. So I had to do a certain amount myself. But you know, that
Yeah.
of course, if you're completely ignorant of the subject,
Yeah.
then it's helpful
Yeah.
to have a
Right.
script that
Okay.
But then you're not a functionary. Sorry, then you're a functionary. You're not a
You're a
teacher. You
functionary.
are
So
delivering somebody else's script. You're an actor, darling.
right. Well, and that's a great segue because obviously you're a drama teacher. You love theatre. You love acting. You were telling me you've just been to see Conor McPherson's new play this week, and I'm presuming that the actors stuck to the script.
Well, I don't know if they stuck to the script, but I'm I'm expecting they did, but you never know.
So,
There might be
so,
moments. They covered it well. They
so
covered it well.
one of your aims and ambitions in being a drama teacher is that you're wanting it's your students to have a sense of what it is to be an actor, right?
I Look, I'm a great believer in scripts, and I'm a
Right,
great believer in good scripts.
right.
Can I
So,
add that? Can I
so
add that?
are actors merely functionaries? Are
No,
they just
because
right?
they look. Hang on.
Yeah.
There's a difference between an actor getting into character,
Yes.
unfolding the subtleties of the of the underlying narrative and subtext and things
Right.
like that, and a
Right.
teacher getting a script with a load of slides and just going pressing a button and saying, right, here's the capillary, here's this, whatever it happens to be. I don't know. Here's
Well,
percentages.
but a
Whatevs, man.
bad actor following a great script is still a bad actor. A great teacher following a bad script is maybe going to
No, no,
be have an advantage over a great teacher not having any kind of script at all.
no. Well, this, I mean, let's say,
So
let's
one of the
say,
things
no, no, we're
I
going for the sake of argument about these completely nonsensical things we're talking about because we don't know how good the script is. What I
right,
did say was a good teacher getting hold of a bad script. That's where it
yeah,
becomes problematic. Now,
right,
if I'm saying that actually the script should be better, there should be a way of having that conversation with the central management structure saying, I
yeah,
don't believe this script is actually teaching it well. It's wrong. It could
yeah.
be wrong,
It could be
things like
wrong.
that.
It could
So
be wrong, and if it's wrong, and then that. So I think that one of the things that sometimes gets talked about when we talk about scripted lessons is direct instruction. Siegfried Engelmann's model, where his scripts go through a very prolonged, protracted process of quality control. They're constantly iterated with the aim being to produce flawless communication, and that if you on the for anyone who's taught a lesson using direct instruction, that the script they're following will be quite different to the set of PowerPoint slides that Kevin Collins describing, isn't it?
yeah, I think I also come up going back to what I just said about a bad script
Yeah,
is I knew someone who had to teach in a new school.
yeah,
They'd been teaching for 25 years their subject, which was a science subject,
yeah,
and they had to deliver the script that they were given by the head of department. And the head of department was sitting in the lesson, making sure, reading through the script as they taught the lesson, that they were following the script pretty much word for word.
and
And
it was wrong.
not only was it wrong at points, it wasn't very good. The script itself wasn't good, but this was
Right.
written by the head of department. So we're
Mm.
not talking about Engelman's
No,
carefully considered
no, we're not. No, we're not. Yeah,
iteration by iteration that we're talking about with that Greg was talking about there. It's
yeah.
it's not a careful construction over years. It's basically saying your manager knows better than you, and you've got to stick with what your manager says.
Yeah, no, which obviously, that's I think one of the things to do here is to do you know if you come across Sturgeon's law, Theodore Sturgeon, science fiction writer, famously said 90% of everything is shit. And if we say 90% of scripted lessons are shit, 90% of unscripted lessons are shit, for the sake of argument, if we're comparing shit with shit, then we don't get anywhere. And if we're comparing the best of what we like with the worst of the alternative, again, we just create strawman and caricatures. But if we compare the best of the scripted approach with the best of the freewheeling, freestyling approach uh, as modelled by you, then maybe that's fairer.
It's also about, for a lot of schools, about control.
Well, it absolutely is about control, and there's no question about that. But I think the other end of that, I mean, was the one of the things that I've began noticing 10, 15 years ago, and it's become increasingly more prevalent, is that younger teachers entering the profession have a sense of that they are going to be given centrally prepared lessons, and increasingly often take the view that the idea that they might have to make their own lessons is an entirely unreasonable expectation, and they expect to just be given slides. So the idea that there definitely will be the case of your friend the science teacher who is enslaved by an idiot sitting in the room checking, but there's also this sense of that there's a pressure for schools to produce resources for teachers that maybe don't see it as their job
Yeah,
to
it's
make.
it's interesting, isn't it? Because what happened to those days? We seem to have more time in those
Uh,
days than teachers do now. I don't know what,
we
even
were
though we were
probably doing.
doing this ourselves,
We weren't doing any data entry. I'll tell you that for sure.
right? There seemed to be a lot more time to you know freelance your way through these things. I don't know. Um, it seemed to be.
Well, so I mean, one of the things that one of the experience I had relatively recently was leading on the construction of a centrally produced curriculum, and very much not wanting to go down the route of giving teachers slides, having had lots of subpar experiences with that. I mean, I've got nothing against slide decks per se, but I've often found that the majority of what is on those slides is not actually student facing; it's instructions for teachers, and which then just get just duly shown to students like for no reason. And and and, and I wanted to try and get away from that, so I put together resource packs, which I was describing as flat pack curriculum, like some self assembly required, with the expectation that as an individual teacher, you do the intellectual preparation of looking through the resource pack and deciding what to teach your students that lesson. And obviously, as you might expect, there were teachers that really liked that, but there were definitely teachers that were
Mm,
really upset that they had to do any thinking.
yeah, and should we expect teachers to think?
Should we expect teachers to think? I mean, I think,
Don't
yeah,
think.
I'd rather teachers spent their time in, intellectually preparing for the job of teaching their students than making their own PowerPoint presentation.
Yeah, well,
That
that's
would be my
another thing. I mean, some schools, of course, um, script the lessons from below, if you like, by just telling teachers, right, I want you to put all your lesson plans onto PowerPoint slides. Then we code it centrally, and then
branded.
next
Absolutely
year
fine.
we give those out to everybody else and things like that. So they use their teachers to script lessons, not
So one of the
necessarily
things
at the same standards, etc., etc. But yeah,
one of the things I find myself saying quite a bit working with schools, working with teachers, is to say, I don't want anyone to, throw out all their hard work, but all of those centrally prepared slide decks, if I'm right, and a great deal of those are teacher notes rather than important information for students. But what I would do would encourage teachers to give themselves like an arbitrary slide limit. So like you were allowed 3 slides or five
mm,
slides or however many, but you've got to do the work of deciding which ones they're going to
mm,
be. So, and that level of that level of preparation is, I think, a lot better than just
mm.
picking up a slide deck and pressing go.
What about lessons? I mean, this is where drama comes in as a subject. Certainly,
Yeah,
it. What about lessons which are very much working with children? You're working with them on trying to get them to act well. You can't
yeah.
script that
No,
necessarily. You
you can't.
can you have certain things you can do, but a lot of it is interactive. It's interactive teaching, very heavily so.
It is, and I would imagine for really skilled teachers teaching practical subjects along those lines is that to an extent you're running internal scripts in your head, aren't you? You're like, how have I done this in the past? What do I know works when children have this kind of issue? And you're not having to make it all up on the spot.
Mm. It reminds
I
me of
remember
my.
years ago you talking. Do you remember the 5 minute lesson plan when
That's what
that
I'm just
was?
about to say. I
Were
remember
you?
my first blog post I ever wrote
The
was on
52-year lesson plan, I think you called it.
yeah, was this guy who was a DT teacher in the school I was teaching in then, and we had to hand our lesson plans in to be checked by central office,
Mm,
so to speak. And he'd written dove joint, just do a dove joint, that was it. I said,
sure.
that's not detailed enough. It's not,
A tail joint, surely.
yeah, you know.
Yeah,
So, but of course, he knew what he was doing. He
yeah,
didn't need the
exactly.
script. He didn't
Well,
need
the
to, and
script,
certainly
yeah,
didn't need to write the script so somebody else could check that he was going to teach that in his lesson, which seems
no,
to me a complete waste of time.
no, and you're right, and I think that this is I think as a basic position, if you treat all of your staff in the same way, then you're automatically being unfair. and and it may be the case that there are some teachers within a school that need that scrutiny and that support, but it's certainly not the case that it'll be all teachers. And if you have one rule for all, it's unfair to everyone, I think.
Hmm.
So what about this idea that used wisely and well, these kinds of resources are development tools? They can make less experienced teachers better.
I like use wisely and well.
Mm,
Yes, used wisely and well. Then of course they can be
right.
used foolishly and not. I do think it's interesting that what you said though, and what we both said about the thinking teacher. That how do you let? I mean, apart from the below thing, allowing them to work in teams to create these things. But when they come into a school, of course, they can't get involved in that because they're straight in at the deep end. Here's your first lesson, off you go.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, and to some extent, you can see why you'd want to perhaps introduce teachers to the idea this is the delivery of the lesson and it's an important thing. But
Mm.
at some point, I do think they need to come into lesson planning, lessons planning, curriculum planning, and be taught how to do that. By being involved in it. So because it's an important part of the profession, I think.
Well, is it
Yes.
so important? Because okay, right, okay. So let's close that down really quickly. If we say if we ask, if we don't have centrally prepared resources, and we say to teachers, we want you to make your own lessons, aren't they just going to use AI?
Well,
I mean,
nowadays
yeah,
nowadays
nowadays, but isn't that an inevitability?
I think that's I mean we're getting to a point where the teachers are putting their lessons together by AI. The kids are doing their work at home by AI. The teachers are marking their work by AI. The whole thing sort of intellectually missing out the human, if you like. So the
Well,
more
is
we,
it? So let's, is that the case that
it can be.
it can be, of course it can be, but is it automatically the case that you create a resource using AI, and then the human bit is the interaction with children in the classroom. Currently we haven't got a model for AI doing that.
Well, that would be the next thing, wouldn't it? You go around in your Google glasses or whatever that
Mm.
teach you how to react to that kid. You get to a
Yeah.
point where that could happen.
Well, okay, but we're not there yet. So
Well,
we're
getting
still
there.
we're yeah, but we're not there. So we can't miss out the human ingredient. Like even if we want to eliminate humanity from the process, the the what however
Okay.
your lesson is planned, whether you do it yourself on pen and paper, whether you're handed a plan, whether you get AI to script it for you, you're still having to interact with other human beings.
Yeah, I think that's important, and I think one thing that COVID taught us, I think,
Mm.
is the importance of not only being in a classroom with a teacher, but being in a classroom with other kids,
Yeah,
and the importance of that.
yeah,
But there is a school of thought that having a screen in front of you with AI running, programs that not only teach you stuff, but also respond to how you're learning that stuff and can adjust accordingly. Complete personalized learning, if you like. And this
mm,
has been a dream for certain people for a very long time, absolute
yeah.
personalized learning. And I think AI potentially could do that. Now, whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, um, you could say it's a way of learning. It could be a very successful way of learning, but socially, emotionally, culturally, I would resist it to the
Well,
hills.
for sure, but we're not talking about that because that's a way off yet. But what do you feel about teachers using AI to to?
I don't necessarily think that's a way off, by the way. I don't think that's way off.
Well, okay, but it's not next year, is it?
But teachers using AI in the same sense of what we were talking about earlier, can you use it as a tool or is it using you as a tool? Are you the one who's
Is it
responding? In other words,
is
you
it
put
a
in your
tool or is it
lesson,
a
write
prompt?
me a lesson on this subject, it comes out, you don't even bother looking at it, you start delivering the lesson. Bang, off you go. I don't think that's the best way forward. I can imagine it
No,
being done though.
no, I can imagine it being done. I'm sure it is being done. I'm sure that's happening in classrooms right now.
Is that worse than
Uh,
scripted lessons from a
is
centralized source? Because it's a
yeah,
scripted lesson, isn't it?
yeah, is it? What do we think? Do Would we rather have the human element, even if it's some faceless central bureaucrat, or uh,
A faceless AI.
or the head of department sitting at the back with a clipboard ticking off, or doesn't it matter? Is it functionally irrelevant?
Hmm. Well, if you didn't know, but in the case of the teacher sneaking up to do their PSHE lesson, I bet it happens in PSHE lessons
Oh my
first.
goodness. I'm su- I'm sure it does. I mean, I think where it can be used well, and this is where I've experimented of using it myself, is that you can feed a text into ChatGPT, and you can say, pull out make some great questions on this that are linked to the text, and you can give it parameters to how to do that well. You can read over them and go, yeah, no, those are really good, and you can save yourself time
Right, but
and,
but you
and
said
make
something important there, and that
read over.
was, yeah, those are really good.
Yeah,
You're having a professional judgment on the
yeah.
quality of those questions, which means you know what you're talking about before you even do that.
That's really important, isn't it? And I think that the I'm putting myself in the position of my novice self, my young teacher self, not having any guidance from anyone else, and starting the profession in a world where AI exists,
Mm,
which obviously wasn't the case for me. What would I have done? I would absolutely have used AI, and I wouldn't have had the professional judgment necessarily to be able to do that with the expertise that now I might be able to bring to bear. So there's got to be, has there got to be some point of this idea of resourcing, curriculum, scripting, where we are deliberately and mindfully training teachers in how to think about the resources and how to think about the teaching of their subjects. That's got to be an ingredient, hasn't it?
I think it has to be. I don't think it has to be there from day one. I do
No.
think you've got to let teachers develop it in all sorts of ways. By doing everything at once, it can become too much. But the important thing, whether you is the collective,
So
and it's the time to work
yeah,
together in the collective. And this is the problem with a lot of our teaching now: is 10% non-contact time is not enough. You need
no,
more non-contact time to work with your colleagues,
yeah.
to create things collectively, work on curriculum together, rather
One of my
than have things thrown at you and you
yeah, for
hardly have
sure.
any time to yourself.
One of my favourite models that I've seen working is where schools give departments timetabled co-planning time, where they sit down together and they essentially thrash out next week's lessons. Like, this is the stuff we're going to cover. These are the resources that we've got. This is how I'd use them. What would you do? And everyone leaves that co-planning session with a sense of having a direction
Yeah.
for the
Could I
week to
add
come.
to that, not just next week's lessons, but also the
No, but
curriculum over a longer period, so you
yeah, yeah, yeah.
know where
Let's
these things are
assume you've got
fitting over a
that.
long-term picture?
Sorry, yes. So in that model, the curriculum exists, and what we're doing is we're working out from the curriculum the short-term plan for the next
Mm.
few lessons. And I think that model works nicely, and it gives that kind of sense of apprenticeship to younger teachers where they can interact with their more experienced colleagues and sort of go, oh, okay, yeah, I wouldn't have thought of necessarily doing, and vice versa, of course, where we get this rich exchange of ideas. And in that paradigm, then teaching can still very much be an intellectual endeavor.
That's a nice sort of pause.
Okay. Well, should should we trust teachers to teach, or should we train them to deliver? We've covered a lot of ground there, Martin.
We
You know,
have.
where do people, where do viewers, where do listeners draw the line between the need for consistency and the need for creativity and autonomy? What's important? Do get in touch. Do feel free to tell us what we missed or where
Comment
we missed.
below,
Comment below, within, above, wherever you like.
or on
But
Twitter or Facebook or wherever
all
else
of
we
those,
are.
all of those things. But thanks ever so much for listening to me and Martin waste your time this week.
We have. And let's just do that again.
What do they have to do again?
I don't know what they have to do again. They have to subscribe.
Come on. Yeah, they have to subscribe, or the thing, some way of giving us feedback. Anyway, thanks a lot. See you next
Take care.
next week.
Bye bye.
Bye.